8 signs of Mormon religious trauma.
Now, in therapy, we always allow the client to determine what is categorized as trauma.
Yeah. And if I go to church and someone shakes my hand, they squeeze my hand too hard, is that religious trauma?
There you go. Hold it up for me.
And now it's time to consider the path of your feet, for crying out loud.
Today, we're going to be grappling with the question of religious trauma. It's a term that I've seen floated around the internet, and when I saw it, I was like, okay, it seems to make sense if you don't think about it a whole lot. Because it's like religious trauma, you're like, oh yeah. So like when religions do harm to people, and then you think about it, and you're like, wait a second, religions don't harm people, people harm people. That's the interesting thing. But it's something that is increasing in popularity. It's something that I'm seeing all over social media. And I wanted to take a deeper dive into it today, do some exploration, and see where we end up on this whole topic of religious trauma. Because it's something that I didn't really see until like 2024 to 2025 as like an actual thing. Before this, there was like trauma, and then there was religion. I never saw those two combined to come up with religious trauma.
Across the streams. Oh no, we've got religious trauma now. Yep.
Ashley B, therapist. So this is a gal. She is definitely an Ashley. Straight out of Recess, she is Ashley B, which is great.
Ooh, scandalous!
That's her whole personality, because everything she posts is very scandalous. This little post right here says, the single most important thing we can say to someone who shares they've experienced harm and trauma from Mormonism is this: I believe you. So, I don't know. I look at that and I'm like, harm, I'm with you. Like harm and trauma. Yeah. I want to validate that. Wait, harm and trauma from Mormonism, from a doctrine, from a belief system. It's like, what? Hold up.
Wait a second.
Wait a minute. Some ain't right. So yeah, let's explore. This led me down a rabbit hole of like, okay, wait. So I see this. All right, what is religious trauma, especially within our church? So let's do a little bit of deeper digging here. Here's another post by Ashley B. Very scandalous. This is 8 signs of Mormon religious trauma. So hopefully this can give us a little bit more guidance and clarity. And unfortunately, because this is a family show, the song that she chose for this little reel of hers, not very family friendly. So we're going to have to play our own music that's like edgy and cool and that supports everything that she's trying to say here. But we'll play it without the audio. I'll narrate for those that are listening. It says 8 signs of Mormon religious trauma. Then it comes out super fast. It says 1, chronic shame and guilt. 2, fear of divine punishment. 3, difficulty setting boundaries. 4, perfectionism. 5, identity struggles after leaving. 6, distrust of authority. 7, suppressed sexuality. 8, activation with church-related symbols or practices. So that is the entirety. Those are the 8 signs of religious trauma.
Of Mormon religious trauma. She's specifying the specificity. This is unique to Mormon religious trauma, right? So, there's so many things going on here. Like, I think we should just take it bullet by bullet and just.
All right, let's do that.
Yeah.
It's a lot. There's a lot here. Okay, so chronic shame and guilt as a sign of Mormon religious trauma. What do you think she's trying to accomplish with that?
Well, I'll tell you my heartless take, and then my more empathetic take. How about that?
Sure.
My heartless take is that the other side of the coin of chronic shame and guilt is chronic indulgence in things that you don't believe are good for you. Like, you're chronically doing things that you feel inside are not good for you, but you're doing them anyways because it's either easy or convenient, or you're taking pleasure in it, right? So the cognitive dissonance in this sense, Ashley would say, well, just love the things that you're doing, and then the problem goes away. Like, or you could overcome those things and stop doing those things, repent and transcend those issues and become a better person in that way, right? That's what I would recommend. So there's 2 paths to take on that one.
Right. So
my more empathetic.
Are you saying like their little Jiminy Cricket is telling them, wait a second, you shouldn't be doing those things, and her advice is smash it. Kill the bug. Get out the pest control and just spray.
Get out the raid.
Yeah. Like, how dare you have a conscience?
Yeah, well, something in your head is bugging you about something you're doing, and you can either squash that voice or you can listen to it, like you said, and try and understand where that's coming from. And some things are just silly. I used to have like this fear of talking to cashiers at the store when I was young. You know, I just did not want to do it. It was just very unpleasant.
Is that another sign that we should put up there about Mormon religious trauma?
Yeah, I think that's like
talking to
target trauma or something like that. When I was a kid, I just didn't want to do it. I didn't want to talk to people. But then I realized that that was silly, and then I overcame it, right? So if you're feeling chronic shame and guilt, it's usually because you've taken a teaching in your life and you're misunderstanding it, or you're doing things against the things that you believe, and it's causing that cognitive dissonance. So like, yeah, when you're young, you're taught things, and you can either follow those things or you cannot follow those things and feel chronic shame and guilt. But at the end of the day, like, you need to take ownership for how you're feeling and what you're doing one way or the other and act on it. Like the only those reasons that they're there are only there because you let them. Like those are optional emotions. You know, you can choose pathways out of those rather quickly.
Okay. All right. So chronic shame and guilt, number 1. Number 2, fear of divine punishment.
I mean, if you don't think a lot about the gospel and the plan of salvation and the principles of the gospel, then I could see you getting to this one with as little thought as possible. But the second you actually study the gospel and you understand the plan of salvation, what God has in store for you, is actually the most loving plan that there can be, right? And if there's any fear, it's fear that you're not living up to your own potential in that plan, right? Which is a fear that you can't escape. No one can escape the fear of not living up to your own potential. That's a universal human experience.
Because the thinking goes, the fear comes from like, I better do all the right things, or else I'm not going to be able to live with my family forever. If I can articulate their argument, their side of the things, I think that would be like the ultimate source of fear. It's like, oh no, I better do everything right, or else I can't live with my family forever, you know? And that's being wielded as a club, you know, by people in the institution, just like, yeah, you better stay in line, ha-ha, or your family's at stake, so they're holding your family hostage, which is how they're framing it, which is, if I understand what you're saying, an incorrect way to frame the situation. Because the law, also, look at the way that other creedal Christians believe. It's just like, okay, you've got heaven or hell, which is very action based, right? It's like, all right, That's very clipboard based. Did you do all the right things? If yes, you're allowed into heaven. But if you did the wrong things, then you go to hell. Now, what we believe is that you will end up in the kingdom where you feel most comfortable living the laws of that kingdom. And so if you do not feel comfortable living the celestial laws, then you will not be forced to live in the celestial kingdom. And you will be in a kingdom that matches the level of honor that you have given God in your life. Is that the right way to frame it? I don't know. It seems like if you allow that incorrect framing to guide your decisions and your interactions and your gospel behavior, it seems like that would also probably not lead you to a place with your family as well. Like, I don't think, like, if you're doing everything out of fear does not come from God. Fear is, and when they say, like, fear God or fear the Lord and stuff like that in the Bible, a lot of times it means, like, hey, it's a sign of respect. You know, it's like, do things because you honor and respect God. If you do things out of fear, it's not a very loving or tender relationship that you have with God at that point, you know, so you probably wouldn't be very comfortable in his presence anyway at that point. So if you are already thinking in this fear-based system, it means A, you don't understand the plan of salvation. You don't understand your relationship with God, but also B, you're probably not on track to get to where you're trying to get to in the first place through that fear, if that makes sense.
Yeah. The plan of salvation lays it out clearly. I think it was President Oakes who said at some point that when you get to the judgment seat at the end of your life, like it won't be a tally of all the things that you did wrong versus all the things you did right, but more just a complete understanding of who you've become. The actual person that you are at that point is what will indicate where you need to go and how happy you will be there. Right? The people who go to the celestial kingdom and terrestrial kingdom will be happy there. Like that's the whole point. Like they will actually be happy. Now, the people who go to the celestial kingdom will have a degree of happiness much greater than those who are in the other kingdoms. But you won't know that if you're in the celestial kingdom. Like you won't be able to understand that depth, right? So I feel like it's probably the most fair doctrine out there of all the Judeo-Christian religions, like all the different denominations. It seems like the fairest one that I could find, right?
Well, and it's incredibly more fair than like the nothingness, like you just kind of dissolve into the nothingness, or you come back as like a heron or, some kind of a tree frog or something like that.
Oh yeah, 100%. So yeah, a divine punishment, that's something that as a child, with a child's understanding of how God works, that might make sense, but you should quickly grow out of that if you're trying to understand the gospel.
So, difficulty setting boundaries.
Is this something that
religious trauma?
Difficulty setting boundaries. I'm not sure where she's getting
this one. Religion has traumatized you so much that you cannot set your own boundaries. Okay, so like when somebody at work comes up to you and they're like, "Hey, I'm going to make you do all of my work," and you're gonna say yes to me because of that. I'm gonna bully you into doing everything that I want you to do because you are a member of this church. You will say yes, and you will have that difficulty setting that boundary and saying no, I shouldn't stand up for myself, which is weird because it's like everything in the church teaches you to Christ himself, when it says like turn the other cheek, I think that's one of the most misunderstood doctrines out there. Back in the day, they would like when someone slaps you, I think it was like on the right cheek, it meant that they had to backhand you to do it, which was what they would do to slaves and servants and people in lower class systems. And so to turn the other cheek would force them to slap you like they would slap an equal. So in reality, it's saying like, hey, don't let people treat you as inferior to them. You are equal to other people, which means that if someone is trying to encroach on your boundaries, you should push back and say, hey, it's not okay. We are the same. We are equal, and I'm not going to tolerate that. Jesus was absolutely 100% setting boundaries all the time. Like he even checked Peter multiple times. He even called Peter Satan. He said, "Get behind me, Satan," multiple times because
it's pretty snarky of him. Yeah,
Satan was, Peter was acting out of ignorance, saying things like, you should shirk off your divine mission. You shouldn't go through it. He was just like, hey, no. This is my goal. This is my mission. I respect you, but you gotta get that away from me. Identity struggles after leaving.
Identity struggles after abandoning your identity? Weird. But people have identity struggles after joining. Like you're just shifting into a new identity. This almost has nothing to do with religion at all. It's just whenever you have a major pillar of your identity that you're swapping out for another one, that's going to cause struggles. That's just a natural human experience. So this has nothing to do specifically with the Mormon Church, the LDS Church, right?
This is more of like a personal thing. This is very personal. Yeah. It's like you should be developing your skills, your hobbies. You should be reading out of the best books. You should be developing your hobbies, your skills. You should be a light on top of the hill. These are doctrines from the church that are saying you should be in your community, shaping and becoming something that people are attracted to, so that you can then point them to the gospel. The gospel being your entire identity means that you haven't really done much more than just showing up at church and then going home. It's like you should be pursuing things outside of. You look at the fighting preacher. There was a guy. He was the world heavyweight champion boxer, and then he served his community after that. He joined the Lions Club, or he founded that chapter in Palmyra, and he became a pillar of that community they knew him as a member of the church, but he was also part of a lot of other organizations and had developed other skills and hobbies and passions that people knew him for. And there are plenty of members of the church that do that. Distrust of authority. Not sure where she's getting that one.
Yeah, I mean,
if anything, the church should be teaching you to trust authority. So it might be like over trusting of authority would be a sign of, I don't know
trauma.
If that's just me.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm not sure on that one.
Not 100% sure what she means on that one. Suppress sexuality? Speak for yourself.
Yeah, I think she protests too much. I don't know. Yeah, I think with a church that has that is holding up America's birth rate by itself almost,
single-handedly. Yeah.
I don't know if this is the place to have that argument, but
I mean, it's our church and Elon Musk that are sustaining the population right now, right?
For real. Yeah, I mean, there's suppression of, inappropriate sexuality for sure. There's some weird stuff you shouldn't get into. It's probably not helpful for your psyche. So yeah, I'll give her that. And I say we should probably suppress out some of that stuff, You don't need to entertain every fantasy out there, that's just not the purpose of life.
And then the last one, activation with church-related symbols or practices. I'm going to tell you, I'm going to put a TBH on this one. TBH, I have no idea where she's coming from or where she's going with this. I don't know what this means. It seems kind of like a nothing burger with a side of word salad, but do you understand what she's getting at with activation with church-related symbols or practices?
I'm guessing you see a Book of Mormon and you get scared. I see a lot of people
She's got a description here. Hold on. Feeling uneasy, panicked, or emotionally overwhelmed when encountering hymns, temples, scripture, or church-related conversations. All right, so let me see if I can act this out for a second. Let me just see. So you've left the church. You're suffering from Mormon religious trauma. All right, and then maybe you have an old hymnal in your house, and your toddler finds it in a piano bench. And there you go. Hold it up for me. Is that what she's talking about? Is that feeling uneasy, panicked, or emotionally overwhelmed when encountering the hymns?
That one baffles me a little bit. I think the hymns are awesome. And they're mostly universal, just Christianity. There's not a whole lot of unique hymns in the hymn book. A lot of them are shared across belief systems. So,
yeah.
Again, not specific to the LDS Church.
Okay. So basically she's saying being triggered. If you get triggered, you see your scriptures laying on the ground, you're like, ah. You see a hymnal, ah. You see a temple, ah.
Yeah, I don't know.
That shows religious trauma. Okay, so we have effectively...
Our lives are not hard enough.
Okay, now this isn't. But wait, there's more. I feel like Billy Mays. All right, so this isn't it. We have effectively figured out what the signs of Mormon religious trauma are. So now we can tell if we have it. Okay, but do we know what it is yet? There isn't any authority yet on Mormon-specific religious trauma, but we did find some on religious trauma in general, and let's see if she can give us some insight on what religious trauma is. So this is a gal who says she is an authority figure on religious trauma. She is a therapist, so she is the same thing as Ashley B., and she is going to give her opinion, and she's going to teach us from on high about what religious trauma is. So prepare to be educated.
You can help someone who's going through processing their religious trauma. So what exactly is religious trauma? In simple terms, it's the emotional, psychological, and physical distress that can come from harmful religious experiences. Now, in therapy, we always allow the client to determine what is categorized as trauma. There are big T traumas and little t traumas. Big T traumas will be things like car accidents, things that happened acutely and suddenly and were kind of overwhelming all at the same time. It's how it can affect people.
Okay, well, so we've been educated now, so I think we know we have some authority. So if I understood this gal correctly, she just said that religious trauma is categorized by whatever the patient deems religious trauma is. Is that right? So
Yep, that's what she said.
So whatever religious trauma, like if I want something to be religious trauma, it then has to be religious trauma.
Yeah, I mean, we could let's just test this out. Let's take it a step down the road here.
Yeah.
And if I go to church and someone shakes my hand and they squeeze my hand too hard, is that religious trauma? Does that fit the definition? What if, I remember when I was a priest, I didn't say the prayer right when I was blessing the sacrament, and I had to say it again. Religious trauma. If I say so, right? I guess it's completely up to me. The bishop forced me to speak into the microphone again and again until I got over my silly stutter of the day. And now I can't hold a job because I've been traumatized, right? Is that what we're going with here?
Let me just implement another practice that I've just learned. I believe you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for affirming my trauma.
There you go.
Now, personally, I do believe it's trauma instead of just a weird thing that happened in my past that I had a hard time getting over. And I'm going to be treating it as trauma and applying for disability and not going to work anymore.
Wonderful. So where do we get you those forms? Where is there some kind of system that we send you down now until?
Yeah. I just don't get it, because with these things, people do dumb things at church all the time. People will say things that aren't according to the doctrine, or people in positions of power might tell you to do things that you don't want to do or that are legitimately inappropriate. Those people are wrong, and you should ignore them. You should just use that capacity, that light of Christ that God gave you, and the gift of the Holy Ghost to discern when those things should or should not work for you, and work with them, or if they're doing stuff that's inappropriate, don't work with them and talk to other leaders about it, right? This is a people problem, not a religion problem.
Here's my question. As we have been going through this learning experience together, I'm wondering, what is the actual definition of trauma now? Okay? So let's explore and find some kind of authoritative source. I would say somebody with maybe some trauma experience might be an authoritative source. There's a gal by the name of Patricia A. Rezick. She's a PhD on the American Board of Professional Psychologists. Do you think we would give her the kind of clout to say that she knows more or less what trauma is?
I would think so.
Okay. All right. Well, let's see what she has to say about it. The most recent iteration of the American Psychiatric Association's definition of trauma included experiencing, witnessing in person, or learning about an event to a family member or close friend that involves exposure to actual or threatened death, serious injury, or sexual violence. In other words, traumatic events are quite serious, possibly life-threatening events. To call normal but distressing life events traumas or traumatic, e.g., loss of a job, divorce, natural death of a loved one, is understandable, but tends to deflate the meaning of events that are most likely associated with PTSD. Although stressful, these type of normative events may cause other reactions, anxiety and depression, but not PTSD. The previous version of the diagnostic manual did include the subjective responses of fear, helplessness, or horror. However, these responses did not best define the stressor criterion of PTSD and excluded other important emotions of sadness, anger, and shame. These emotional responses were dropped in the recent version. She says, why does this matter? Some of it is pragmatic. Scientific study of PTSD needs to have clear definitions of what they are studying. Otherwise, from study to study, it is not clear if the findings can be replicated in what we actually know. To understand the nature of trauma and how to prevent or treat PTSD requires some agreement on how to measure the phenomenon of trauma. When the word is watered down to include any stressful event, it becomes meaningless, and we fail to appreciate the severity of some of life's worst events and their impact on those who have suffered from them or have not recovered. experiencing, witnessing in person, or learning about an event of a family member or close friend that includes exposure to actual or threatened death, serious injury, or sexual violence. So it's contained in those 3 categories.
So that's what trauma is.
That's trauma. That's trauma. So that's what classifies something as a traumatic experience or a traumatic event. So this is fun. We've been learning some things, but maybe that's a rogue PhD. Okay. So maybe we've just, we're biased in our search. We found some fringe member of society. We've been cherry picking. Let's turn to the DSM. All right. The DSM-5, religious trauma is not currently recognized as a distinct diagnosis in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. So that's the latest edition. So they're kind of saying it's not a thing. But, okay. So, help me that's reconcile this. What do we do? I've just learned a bunch about religious trauma. And then I'm learning some contradicting information about actual trauma.
Yeah, because I just learned that the things that happened to me that were uncomfortable were religious trauma, which helped me realize how much gravity they had in my life and helped me push to change my identity. Now you're telling me that I just had a bad day. And now I don't feel very good about myself. Kind of embarrassed, feeling a little bit of shame and guilt for having believed these people online.
Would you say
my boundaries have obviously been crossed.
That's right.
I can't remember the rest of the list, but it probably happened in that process. So yeah I think that, people are going to probably be really annoyed that we're even talking about this and that we're disregarding the term religious trauma entirely, but it's just not the right words to use there.
Well,
there's so much packed into that.
It seems a little bit superfluous to add the location identifier of your trauma. So trauma is a real thing. Trauma can happen inside a religion. So there can be traumatic events. We see that all the time. Like a sexually violent event absolutely can happen inside a church or an institution like that.
Yeah.
We're not saying that's not the case. However, by framing it as a religious trauma, the bad guy turns away from a rogue actor in society and towards the institution of that religion. So she's painting the boogeyman as the church in its doctrine, everything it preaches. That's the bad guy in this instance. Whereas what we're learning from the PhDs on the American Board of Professional Psychology is saying, no. Trauma means very specific things, and people can act out trauma on other people, but as a whole, the religion isn't engaging in anything that fits within those categories. If we're talking about the religion itself, people inside the religion can absolutely do that. But that's where we separate the people from the institution of the religion and say, that was a weird dude. That was an evil guy doing horrendous, hideous, awful, nasty, no good things, and he should be sent to jail. He should have consequences, absolutely, and we should get him out of society. However, the religion, more times than not, has produced a net positive on society and in families. So, to help drive this point home, with this newly acquired knowledge, I want to play a game called Can You Spot the Trauma?
And now it's time to be of good cheer, for heaven's sakes.
Okay, so here's the game. I'm going to show you 3 pictures, and at the end of it, I want you to tell me which one is not trauma, okay? And I want you to keep in mind, some of this is going to be a little bit graphic, a little bit intense, so you tell me at the very end, which one of these is not trauma. Okay, so first picture, bunch of guys in a trench. This looks like World War I. Mud all the way up to their boots. They've got looks like some trench foot might be going on, very possible. Looks like they've experienced some shelling, but there are some smiles in here. Here's the second one. Looks like a little bit of a black eye there. The husband in an angry stance, or maybe partner or something like that. Some angry coworker or something like that. Very aggressive body language standing there. Okay. And I feel like if you have any children that are watching this, I would ask them to leave the room because this next image is going to be a little bit graphic and probably a little bit terrifying for those of you at home. So viewer discretion is advised. Okay, this isn't for the week of Constitution, but here we go. Take a deep breath and tell me. Look into that. Look at this. Don't look away.
I'm having a hard time looking at it.
All right. See that? Happy family. This is straight from the church website. Okay. And I'm sorry that I had to put this on you, but
I cannot believe you.
After all of that, can you spot which one is not trauma?
Well, this one's obviously trauma. I'll have to answer that one right here because these kids all had to read their scriptures that day and they all had to say their prayers. Their parents are involved in their lives and they probably go to church every single Sunday.
Yeah.
I don't know. They do not look happy. They do not look well. They need to be liberated from their family immediately.
Okay. So that is definitely trauma. That's what we're saying.
Yep, we spotted the trauma.
We got it.
Nailed it.
All right. Boom. So you're saying one of the others was not trauma.
Ooh, that's a tough one. Maybe they're all trauma. Everything's trauma. I think everything is trauma.
It's all trauma. Yeah. You found it out. It was a trick question. It's all trauma.
It's all trauma. The World War I, the domestic abuse, the kids going to, frolicking in the woods. It's all trauma.
It's all trauma. Okay. And when everything is trauma, nothing is.
Nothing is. Cue the syndrome meme.
That's from straight from The Incredibles there for all of those Disney kids at home.
All the Disney adults watching too.
That's right. What is the harm of spreading the message of religious trauma? Of evangelizing religious trauma?
I mean, that's easy. I'll use an example. The other day, my little girl was walking on. She had these big fuzzy socks on. She started running through the kitchen, and she fell. And the first thing she did when she fell is she looked up to me to see my reaction, and she looked up to Hannah to see her reaction.
Yeah.
Now Hannah is a gasper. Like when something happens, she gasps really loud.
Yeah.
And so when our daughter fell, she gasped, and our daughter looked up and realized that she was traumatized and started to cry. Right? Where the other day, the same thing happened, but Hannah wasn't around, and she looked up at me, and I said, "That was crazy. What a fun little trick you just did." And she's like, "Oh yeah, that was kind of fun." She was slipping around on her socks, and she got up, and she wasn't traumatized at all, didn't cry, was just fine, just dusted off her knees and kept going. So I think that same analogy applies to religious trauma, right? We have these bumps and we have this friction with other people in the church, and we can either take that and take the good from it and realize like that was an uncomfortable experience, but it's not going to be the end of everything I am. Or we can listen to people who say, that is the end of everything you are. There is a menacing force trying to tear you apart, and that was a display of that malicious force, which is the church that's trying to destroy you.
Yeah.
So you can believe that, and then realize that and deconstruct your whole identity off of it, and then have this huge crisis at the end. Or you can take it for what it was: is that was the bishop who said something he probably shouldn't have, or that was a church leader who overstepped their bounds, and I'm not going to take that personally.
I think I agree with most of what you're saying. The only part that I disagree with, and I might push back a little bit, is the end goal of classifying it as trauma. So I don't think that it's going to end with people just deconstructing their entire identity, as much as I think this is going to end inside of a therapist's office. And I think this was designed to do that. So this is marketing material from a therapist who just found a new marketing campaign to get new clients so that she can get recurring monthly retainers for something that will never go away. Because
you can't fix religious trauma.
It's just going to be there all the time.
There's no cure.
This is a golden goose in therapy, right? Because it's like, all right, you're going to like all the ways that you can get triggered. She just listed like 8 different ways that she's saying like, hey, You can pay me, and I can be the one that you call. As soon as you see a hymnal on the ground, you call me. As soon as you see a temple on the highway, you call me. And I will walk you through this.
That is a gold mine, especially in Utah. There's a lot of temples and a lot of hymnals.
Ton of hymnals, yeah. So for, a small $300 a session, I will be able to help you overcome the trauma from the religion, from that, just like that picture of that happy, stable family. I will help you get over that. As long as you can pay,
As long as you can pay. Exactly.
Fees and restrictions apply.
Exactly. So, results may vary.
That's right. So I don't know. I think this is wordsmithing. This is all just marketing for therapists that are saying like, hey, I need new clients. I think I can find a way to create this new campaign, this new idea that'll help me get out there. But it sounds like doing this is actually going to be harmful for people who should actually be in therapy, right?
Yeah.
So people that are experiencing actual trauma, people that went to war, maybe they had a very traumatic experience, maybe they got their arm blown off, and maybe they're sitting in her office and saying, okay, wait a second, I'm seeing your social media stuff saying that my experiences in war were exactly comparable to a kid having to give a sacrament talk one week, or
even remotely comparable, like even in the same ballpark, like it's just weird to even believe that.
Yeah, so I mean, it seems a little bit silly to me. It also seems a little bit ignorant of the other quote-unquote high control systems in society, because there are a lot of other institutions that seem to fit all of those qualifications that you don't see any therapists out there advertising for. For example, school. You don't see any school trauma therapists out there. You don't see any IKEA trauma therapists out there. Okay, IKEA's exactly like high control. You're feeling lost. It's hard to set boundaries because you go in there thinking like, I'm going to just buy what I want to buy. And then by the end of it, you got a bunch of other stuff in your cart because they're basically giving it away. And then you're eating Swedish meatballs. And then there are so many other institutions out there.
I mean, I did some research. I went down a rabbit hole about traumatic experiences in the church versus public education system. And it's tenfold in the education system.
Really?
I mean, it's just, the numbers are way higher. The odds of you having, as a student experiencing sexual misconduct from an adult in the public education system is like, I think it's 10% of the population will experience that in their public education career, right?
Wow.
And they're from K to 12, 10% of the kids are going to experience sexual misconduct from adults in that system,
which we just learned classifies as actual trauma. So they will have actual trauma from the school systems.
Right. Yeah. So it'll be traumatic for them, So maybe we could focus there. Maybe that seems to be like a huge issue that we should probably address, where the numbers of you compare the church to that, and it's just a fraction of sexual misconduct happening in the church. And as we already said before, sexual misconduct is not a part of our doctrine. You're not going to find that anywhere.
That's right.
Yeah. We heavily recommend those people go to jail or are punished for whatever misconduct they partake in. Like, nobody wants that. Not a single person in the church wants that.
Yeah. So if I were to do anything, like any kind of solution here, I would just say you can probably just remove that religious modifier off of that term and just say, okay, do you have trauma or not? And so, like, could you imagine if there were a doctor out there that specialized in coffee table sprained ankles or coffee table dislocated shoulders or something like that? Wouldn't that be a little bit silly? Wouldn't you go, wait a second, I don't think that doesn't seem to, I think I would have similar questions. It's like, why do you
What
think
does the
it's
coffee table
necessary
have to
to
do with it?
add the location of the trauma to that,
Yeah.
and then painting coffee tables as this big evil, saying
It's
the
monolithic.
danger, 8 signs that you've had a sprained ankle from a coffee table and how coffee tables are bad, and creating an entire podcast about coffee table sprained ankles. I tell you, that could be something else.
Gold mine.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right. So for that reason, we call these people to consider the path of their feet. It seems like they actually might be doing more damage than good for the people that they're actually taking money from to help by equating their traumatic events with little Timmy having to give a talk or little Timmy being raised in a supportive, healthy, happy family. In an institution that's going to tell him, stay away from evil. Try and do things that are good. Maybe that's not trauma. Okay? Maybe we could call that distress. Maybe it's not as marketable.
Maybe.
But you might be a little bit more honest in your marketing efforts, and you might be able to help those actual people suffering from actual trauma to feel like they have terms that actually describe what they're feeling and going through.
Exactly.
So for that reason, we call these people to consider the path of their feet and think about where that's going to go.